I will be comparing the D780 and its predecessor, the D750, looking at their specs and hopefully helping you decide on which camera is right for you. Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name's Tim Stolars, and today I'm really excited to have both the D780 and the D750 in front of me. I recently picked up the D780, and because I was formerly a D750 shooter, I thought I could share my experience and discuss the reason I decided to upgrade, and maybe help one of you make the decision on if you should invest in the newer, more expensive D780, or pick up the cheaper yet still very capable D750. So getting right into it, the biggest reason I personally switched over is the video capabilities. If you know anything about Nikon's mirrorless Z6, the D780 is basically the same camera when the mirror is up in live view, albeit with a few differences, which I'll explain later in this video. The D780 can now shoot in 4K up to 30 frames per second. In addition, it can also shoot 120 frames per second for those buttery smooth slow motion shots. That means if you are working with a 24 frame per second timeline, you can slow down the footage 20% while keeping everything smooth. With the D750, you are limited to 1080 at 60 frames per second and no 120 frames per second even at 720. Closely related to video modes is the autofocus in live view, which on the D750 is extremely poor. The D780 has a phase detection autofocus and uses the same updated algorithm that is on Nikon's flagship professional camera, the D5, while the D750 uses slower contrast detection. If you've ever noticed your camera's autofocus change its focus from its farthest limit to its closest, the camera is hunting for focus and is a result of contrast detection. With the D780's new phase detection autofocus system, it works significantly faster and is much more precise. As you can see with the D750, when I have both of them set to full-time servo autofocus, or AFF, even the slightest movements make the D750 start hunting for focus. This limits where you can move in the frame and still keep focus on yourself or any object you'd like to bring attention to by putting it in front of the camera. Another video-related feature the D780 has is the ability to record 10-bit video externally to a monitor through HDMI. This allows for much more flexibility for color grading and post-production when compared to the internal 8-bit video. This is because you are recording video with 1 billion colors when compared to 16 million, which is 64 times more color information. This also allows for higher dynamic range to be captured, which is how much detail you can see in the darkest blacks and the highlights of your scene. Now I know I keep going on about the video features on a DSLR camera, which isn't meant to be its primary use, but like I said, it's the biggest reason I switched over, and likely why someone might pick up the D780 over its older brother. Now moving on to the photography side of things, although there are definitely upgrades between these two cameras, the differences may not be as easily noticed and is the reason units of the D750 are still selling. The D780 now has a sensor that is backside illuminated, which increases the amount of light that can be captured and gives better low light performance. The native ISO has also been increased to 51,200 from 12,800. The D780 also reportedly can take up to 1,030 more photos on one battery. That's 2,260 photos for the D780 when compared to the 12,030 on the D750. A bump in continuous shooting of 7 frames per second versus 6.5, which Nikon states is 17% faster. I'm not quite sure how. And the D780 can also shoot up to 12 frames per second in live view mode, which is extremely helpful for a fast action shooting. The two SD card slots now accept UHS 2, although even shooting at 4K at 30 frames per second, which has the highest reported bitrate of 144 megabits per second, which is 18 megabytes per second, it's still below the threshold of a UHS 1 card, which are able to sustain write speeds of 30 megabytes per second. I personally wouldn't recommend getting the faster cards unless you want faster transfer speeds to your computer, because they are between 5 to 6 times more expensive and you won't be able to achieve higher bit rates that the cheaper cards can handle. Wrong. That is wrong. You will most definitely be able to get a benefit from using a UHS 2 card over UHS 1 card, and that's going to be in the buffer of the camera. When I press halfway on the shutter, you can see the buffer of 15. However, when I go to my camera roll, you can see we're on image 9040. So we ended up at 9,067 photos. That means the buffer ended up going for 27 images before it was full. So as you can see, you definitely get a decent sized buffer with the UHS-1 card on this camera. And I think it's definitely more than enough for most people. But if you're somebody that shoots wildlife or sports and you need that larger buffer size, then I guess you just have to buy the more expensive card. The D780 also has a focus stacking option, which can take up to 300 photographs at different focus distances, so that you can stitch the images together in post-production to make one photograph with a depth of field as large as you'd like. This is very useful for landscape and macro photography, where you specifically want to choose what is in focus and what isn't. The D780 can now shoot at 1/8000th of a second, which is twice as fast as the D750's 1/4000th of a second. And on the other side of the shutter speed spectrum, you can now hold your shutter open for a whopping 900 seconds, which is 15 minutes when compared to the D750's 30-second long shutter speed. And lastly, the D780 is using Nikon's newest and fastest processor, Exceed 6, which can also be found in the D6, the newest camera in that line that costs over 2.5 times as much at 8,500 Canadian. As for similarities, you are basically getting the same number of megapixels on the sensor, although the D780 has marginally more at 24.5 instead of 24.3. The screen is still the same at 3.2 inches, albeit touchscreen on the D780, and like the D750, the D780 still does not have in-body image stabilization, which is one of the only functional differences between this camera and Nikon's mirrorless Z6. As far as physical differences on the camera, there aren't too many. The D780 is 2 to 3 millimeters longer, wider, and taller than the D750, although Nikon's website states the D750 is 750 grams and the D780 is 840 grams. I weighed these two and they are the exact same at 754 grams, both with no battery or SD cards. A few buttons also have been changed on the cameras, but not so many that you'll have to relearn the layout. As you can see, the info button has been moved to the bottom left, which moves the I button to the bottom right, and the live view button has been moved to the right side of the viewfinder. And most importantly, the ISO has been moved to near the shutter, which I think makes a lot of sense. The D780 also added an extra autofocus button where your exposure and autofocus lock used to be, which they moved down a little on the D780. Now it does seem that the D780 is better than the D750 in almost every way, which I would hope given that the D750 was released in 2014 and the D780 6 years later in 2020. The D750 comes up on top with two specific features that might be a deal breaker for you. The D750 has a built-in flash and the ability to attach a battery grip, both of which were removed on the D780. Nikon indicates that they did this to increase the quality of the weather seal on the body. In addition, it's clear that they used a different plastic material on the body. The D750 is finished with a darker material than the D780, and something I actually don't like and was disappointed with is the feel of the camera. For some reason, it feels a little bit more plasticky and less dense. It seems like the outside of the body heats up a little faster from holding it when compared to the D750, which I haven't seen anyone else mention. This is something I'm noticing less now that I'm only using the D780, but when I first picked it up, right after holding the D750 in my hand, it's something I noticed right away. So I think that is it, folks. Yes, the D780 has a lot of upgrades and new features, which is expected from an update to a camera that's 6 years in the making. But the D750 is still a very capable camera with a lot of good specs, and at a discounted price of 2,000 Canadian dollars when compared to 3,000 for the D780, it might just be the perfect option for someone who wants to upgrade to a full frame camera from a crop sensor or a point and shoot. I hope I was able to clear a few things up and lay out the differences between these two cameras and help you decide on what camera is right for you. I will leave links below in the description to where you can purchase these two cameras. If you enjoyed this video or found this information useful, I'd really appreciate if you could leave a like and a comment below. Let me know what camera you are shooting with and why you decided to upgrade or not. Thank you for spending this time with me, and I'll see you next time. Take care.